Well, good morning. Thank you. Thank you for the response. I know you're alive. I know you're awake. Okay. Well, my name's Chris. I'm one of the teaching pastors down here at Rimrock downtown. If I haven't met you, nice to meet you. Glad you're here. Really, just love being a part of this community, this growing community. I'm going to share a few announcements that we want you guys to know. Um, that part of being a growing community is the need for more people to lead us in this community. And so what we've ventured to find is a potential new position of a associate pastor for Rimrock downtown. In order to do this, we're a congregational church. Rimrock as a whole is a congregational church. So any kind of pastoral position like that needs the approval of the congregation. And so next Sunday, we are actually having a special congregational meeting up the hill at our main campus at 12:30. So right after second service church, whoever wants to be a part of that is gonna go up the hill to Johnson Siding and join for that congregational meeting next Sunday, May 5th at 12:30 at the main campus. And so the purpose of that is to approve a search team in order to look for a potential associate pastor for our community down here at Rimrock downtown. So that's pretty exciting that we are growing to the place that we need something like that, a position like that. We're also growing in the need of administrative stuff and communication and all that stuff. And so we've actually opened up a position. This one doesn't need like congregational approval, but we've opened up a position of an administrative assistant to be a part of this community and help us out in that way. And so there's going to be a job description, a write-up in an email coming out this week. But if you're interested in something like that, please reach out to Evan, and he'd love to talk to you about that. So those are two kind of new positions that are coming down the pike for Rimrock downtown. Last thing is that if you've been a part of Rimrock downtown or Rimrock as a whole for a little bit or a long bit, but haven't yet taken that step to become a member, we would love to talk to you more about that and what that even means to become a member of our community. And so we're going to have a meeting next Monday night, May 6th at 6 o'clock p.m. So May 6th at 6 down here at Rimrock downtown. So if you're interested in even just learning what it means to kind of take the next step of becoming a member of our community, please join us for that. All right, enough with announcements. Let's dive into it. This morning is a monumental Sunday morning. You guys know why? Because we are wrapping up and bringing to a close the series that we're in Deuteronomy. Okay. I thought I'd hear a couple of woohoos. But truly, you guys, and I hope that if you guys have walked with us for any part of this series, a couple Sundays or every Sunday of this series, that I hope that just like me, you've gotten a ton out of it, that you have drawn closer to Jesus, that you've learned more about God's character and who he is. And if I were to wrap up the series in the book of Deuteronomy in one word, I would say worship. And really bringing us to an understanding and a place of worshiping God, and that he is worthy of our worship. So before I dive into teaching on this last passage of Deuteronomy, I'd like to read kind of a larger portion of these last passages. But just so that you guys don't have to listen to more of my voice, I've asked Aaron to come up and read to you this portion of Scripture. And this is coming out of the last chapters of Deuteronomy, primarily and especially the entirety of the last chapter, chapter 34. And so we'll have it on the screen, but just so that we can really honor the word of the Lord and not fall asleep, would you stand with us and listen to the word as Aaron reads it.
We'll start at Deuteronomy 32:48. That very day the Lord spoke to Moses, "Go up this mountain of the Abarim, Mount Nebo, which is in the land of Moab, opposite Jericho, and view the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the people of Israel for a possession, and die on the mountain which you go up, and be gathered to your people. Aaron your brother died in Mount Hor and was gathered to his people, because you broke faith with me in the midst of the people of Israel at the waters of Meribah Kadesh in the wilderness of Zin, and because you did not treat me as holy in the midst of the people of Israel. For you shall see the land before you, but you shall not go there, into the land that I am giving to the people of Israel." This is the final blessing which Moses, the man of God, blessed the people of Israel before his death. Then Moses went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo, to the top of Pisgah, which is opposite Jericho. And the Lord showed him all the land, Gilead, as far as Dan. And the Lord said to him, "This is the land of which I swore to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. I will give it to your offspring. I have let you see it with your eyes, but you shall not go over there." So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab, according to the word of the Lord. And he was buried in the valley of the land of Moab, opposite Beth Peor, but no one knows the place of his burial to this day. Moses was 120 years old when he died, and his eye was undimmed. In the plains, and his vigor unabated. And the people of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. Then the days of weeping and mourning for Moses were ended. And Joshua the son of Nun was full of the spirit of wisdom, for Moses had laid his hands on him. So the people of Israel obeyed him and did as the Lord commanded Moses. And there has not arisen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face, none like him, for all the signs and the wonders that the Lord sent him to do in the land of Egypt, to Pharaoh, and to all his servants, and to all his land, and for all the mighty power and the great deeds of terror that Moses did in the sight of all Israel.
All right, thank you, Aaron. Now you guys know why I didn't want to read it. But as we listen to the last passages of this book, and we listen to kind of the last part of Moses' life, really seeing a glimpse of Moses crossing the finish line, in a sense, we see this life of Moses. And even in just these short-ish passages that we just read, we see that in Moses' life, there's what do we get in Moses? We really just get this mixed bag, right? Like, did Moses do well? Like, well done, good and faithful servant, or did he fail? I mean, it said that he broke faith with God and wasn't able to enter into the promised land. But then, like, 2 verses later, it says, this is the man of God who gave a blessing on Israel. So which is it? How did Moses' life go? Did he do well or did he fail? And I think if we look at it, we see a little bit of both. Was Moses perfect? No, not at all. But I think that Moses had a few things that he held on to, a few things that he always came back to that served as anchors for his life. And these anchors that he came back to, that he held on to, helped him by the end of his life helped him to still have a life where he could say, he was regarded as a man of God. And I think that that last part of Deuteronomy really served as almost like an epitaph of Moses' life. And if I get to my life and I have like half of an epitaph like that, like even a fraction, a portion of an epitaph like that, I'd be pretty pleased, right? Because we see that this was a life worth living toward. This was a life worth striving for. So how? How do we live for a life like this? How do we strive for a life lived well and finished well? How do we live well and finish well as men and women of God? And I think that we can look at a few of these anchors in Moses' life. Because I think that Moses had a few, I'm going to call them also virtues, that he held on to that we should strive for. And that we should hold on to ourselves. And so the first virtue, the first anchor that Moses held on to was his perspective. That Moses had perspective of who God was. See, if we look at the 90th Psalm in the book of Psalms, out of all 150 Psalms, this is really the only Psalm recorded that was written by Moses. And in this Psalm, we see a perspective that Moses had of God, of who God was and who he was. In this Psalm, we hear this: Lord, you have been our dwelling place. Other translations say our refuge in all generations. Before the mountains were brought forth, or ever you had formed the earth and the world, from everlasting to everlasting, you are God. You return man to dust and say, return, O children of man, for 1,000 years in your sight are but as yesterday when it is past, or as a watch in the night. So teach us to number our days, that we may get a heart of wisdom. You see, Moses understood who God was, that he was the creator, that he was before all things. And in light of that, he understood who he was, that he was a man, that he was not God. And so he put God in his rightful place, regardless of his circumstances. And I think this is really important for us to understand in our life today, because we have a lot of circumstances that come up in our life. And some of them are good circumstances, and some of them are bad circumstances. And does God change in his goodness and in who he is depending on those circumstances? Absolutely not. And this is what Moses held on to. Regardless of the circumstance, God was still God, and God was still good. Even in the trials, which they had many walking through that wilderness, places where they felt, man, should we just give up? God, he knew who God was. He stayed faithful to knowing his God. Even in the victories, the times where God handed over their enemies to them and gave them victory over their enemies, he knew that it was God who did that. He never wavered from the fact that God was God and God was good. And God was before all things, and God was everlasting. God was in control. And most importantly, God could be trusted no matter what. You see, even in his unfaithfulness, we kind of got a glimpse of his unfaithfulness in this passage, that he broke faith with God and did not regard him as holy. And because of that, he was given a discipline, a consequence, that he wasn't able to enter into the land because of that. But we don't see Moses complaining and coming to God and saying, God, that's not fair. Look what I've done for you. I've done all these things and I made one mistake and that's not fair. We don't even see that. We see a man who trusted who God was and trusted that if this was God's will, if this was God's discipline, then it must be good. That if God says it, and if God does it, then it must be good because God is good. And yeah, in that moment of breaking faith with him, in his sin, he may have lost that perspective for a moment and put himself and his own leadership style first and his own understanding first. But he learned. And he came back to his anchor of perspective. And he learned that in his discipline, God is still good. Even in the consequences that we face because of our own sin in our own life, God is doing something through that. He's showing us something through that. He is still good. Moses had perspective. The second thing that Moses had and held on to was Moses had purpose. Now, I don't say that Moses had a purpose because all of us can tend to be looking for a purpose in life. And the tendency is that we look for a purpose in life in the things that we do or the things that we accomplish. But this wasn't Moses. He wasn't looking for a purpose in the things that he could do. If so, he could have found a purpose in setting the captives free. Was that his purpose? Or was his purpose to lead these people through the wilderness? Or was his purpose found in going up to the mountain and bringing the law down and being the giver of God's good law and his covenant? Was that his purpose? These are hugely significant things that Moses did. But those things were not his purpose. No, his purpose was deeper than that. Those things came out of a deeper purpose that he had in his life. Because see, if we fix our eyes on these significant things that Moses did, we can easily walk away from this and ask the question, what kind of significant things am I supposed to do for God? What kind of impact am I supposed to make for God? What kind of things we tend to try to find our purpose in doing these significant and impactful things in our life. The problem with that is that when we do that, many of those opportunities, many of those things can be stripped away from us in an instant. You know, if we feel like my purpose is to go to be a missionary in China, and that's my purpose, and all of a sudden a pandemic hits, and all the flights are canceled, and you can't get to China, what happens to your purpose? It's gone. So it's not about the things we do for God. You know, if it were about these things, then Moses could have easily said by the end of his life here that, hey, I still got something left in me. I still got gas in the tank. Why aren't you good? Can I be used still, God? Can I do something for you, God? He said at 120 years old that his eyes were undimmed and his vigor unabated. He was strong. He wasn't this old, decrepit man climbing up a mountain. He had a lot left in him. But see, his purpose was not in the significant things he did for God. Instead, his purpose was only to listen and respond to the Lord. To listen to what the Lord told him to do. And do you know what the Lord told him to do In that moment when he was strong and had vigor, he told him to go up the mountain and die. And he listened. And he responded. And he went up the mountain. And he went up from the plains of Moab to Mount Nebo. So Moses, the servant of the Lord, died there in the land of Moab according to the word of the Lord. See, that was his purpose. To do whatever God told him to do. This is the same purpose that Jesus said he had. When he said, "Truly I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise." You see, Jesus knew that, if the Father said, "Heal this person," he would heal him. If the Father said, "Walk away," he would walk away. If the Father said, "Go to this town," he would go to that town. You see, there was many times where he could have stayed where he was and become very significant and very popular among the people. But the Father said, "Don't stay there, and go." And he went. You see, it's a matter of where we find our purpose. Where do we find and have this sense of purpose in our life? Is it to do something spectacular or impactful for God? That's our purpose. If so, what's the measure of that? Where's the standard? What's enough? What's spectacular enough for God? What's impactful enough for God? Because if you look to that, there's always going to be something left to do. There's going to always be something more significant that you haven't done, more impactful that maybe you haven't done. But God wants to, as one author put it, free us from the burden of doing something spectacular for God. Free us from the burden of doing something spectacular for God. And how do we do this? We simply become obedient. We listen to his voice. And in this, then all things that we do become significant, because as it says in Colossians, in whatever you do, in word or in deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. It doesn't matter if you're a missionary in China or a plumber in Rapid City. It doesn't matter if you work at the gas station down the corner or a high executive office up in a tower. That whatever you do in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ. That is your purpose. You see, because it's not what we do that gives us our purpose. It's our purpose that determines what we do. So Moses had perspective. Moses had purpose. And lastly, Moses had passion. And what was this passion? Very similar to his purpose, his passion was simply to know the Lord. That's what he got jazzed about. That's what he got excited about, was to know the Lord. That's why in Exodus 33, he says, "Lord, show me your glory." You guys ever seen Jerry Maguire? Show me the money, right? His passion was money. Moses' passion was the glory of God. That's what he wanted to see. Show me your glory. That's all I want to see. I just want to be in your presence. And in this was fueled by his perspective of who God was. I mean, if you knew that God was the God of the universe, if you knew who God was, you would want to know him too. If you acknowledged who God was, you would want to be in his presence also. You would be passionate about that. And this is what drove his purpose, to hear from God. If we acknowledge and know who God is, wouldn't you want to listen? Wouldn't you want to know what he has to say? God, speak. I'm here. I'm listening. Whatever you want to say. And his passion led him to the end. And in the end, it says, there has not risen a prophet since in Israel like Moses, whom the Lord knew face to face. See, in the end, Moses knew God face to face, and he had this real, raw, radical relationship with God. You see, if you have a relationship with a doctrine, that's not what God is passionate about. If you have a relationship with a theology, that's not what God is passionate about. He wants you to have a passionate relationship with him, with a person, with Jesus. Is this your passion? Is this your purpose? Is this your perspective on your life? Because this is what led Moses to a life lived well and a life finished well. But I think it needs to be said that this was also a life that led to and pointed to and foreshadowed not just a man of God, but the Son of God. Because Jesus came. And at the writing of this, it said, no prophet has arisen since, but there was a prophet who came, who, like I said, was not just a man of God, but was the Son of God, who had perspective. He had perspective of the kingdom of God because he was the king. And he knew that contrary to what everybody else wanted him to do, to reign on earth as king, he knew that the Father had not called him to that. The Father had called him to die as king and to be raised 3 days later. See, he had purpose. His purpose was to hear from the Father. And he listened in obedience to the very end as he walked up the mountain to die. But not for his sin, but for your sin and for my sin. Because he had passion. You know what his passion was? It says in Hebrews 2, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, for the joy, the passion that was set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. His joy, his passion was you, to know you, and for you to know him. That his passion was for you to have a raw, real, radical, intimate relationship with the God of the universe. So as the worship team comes up, we're going to enter into a time of communion. A time of recognizing Jesus and all that he's done for us. Jesus and his passion for us to know him. And so as you guys come up, as the worship team plays, to take the bread and the cup, there's tables up here and back there to take the bread and the cup and remember the joy and the passion that Jesus had right before him as he hung on that cross, as he walked up that mountain to die, for you to know him intimately, passionately. Amen.